Kinanzu is a very inconvincible person.
Okay, Kamene, today have it your way. I am not going to even correct you. I can't take it.
I mean, wait. You guys still get some beating from your parents, as big as some of you are.
You just know I will leave my mother's house when I am 33 years.
That is the way to go, Kamene. Adulting is not the way we thought. See everything the way we thought. See rahisi.
Angalia juba yako.
Tukate maji.
Those interests you have committed to our church. Amen.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions.
Honorable Senators, I hereby report to the Senate that a petition has been submitted through the clerk by Pastor Ocheng Odido and 2 other residents of Kawino North, location in Kisumu County, concerning the ethics and anti-corruption graft investigations of West Kano Irrigation Scheme. As you are aware, under Article 119(1) of the Constitution, and I quote, every person has a right to petition Parliament to consider any matter within its authority, including enacting, amending, or repealing any legislation. Honorable Senators, the salient issues raised in the said petitions are: 1, that the West Kano Irrigation Scheme revolving fund dates from 2009 to 2015, and that in August 2015 a report was made to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption ESC on the West Kano Irrigation Scheme revolving fund, graft involving the Government Rehabilitation Funds, Economic Stimulus Program funds, and the Farmers' Own Saving Funds encompassing irrigation, farm machineries, accessories, aid, and West Kano irrigation rice sales. 2, that the graft involves misappropriation of 13 tractors and accessories granted by the government of Kenya in conjunction with the government of Japan. 3, that upon receipt of the report, an investigation was launched by ESC Western Region Office in Kisumu. And 4, that there is a delay in investigation of misappropriation of funds by Ethics and Corruption Regional Office, which resulted in the culprits going scot-free, and it remains an injustice to the local residents, and that the petitioners have made all efforts to have this matter investigated and resolved, including reporting it to the Commission on Administration Justice, whose response has not been satisfactory. The petitioners therefore pray that the Senate investigates these issues by, among others, instituting a forensic audit of the scheme to ensure that justice is served and culprits are held liable. Honorable Senators, pursuant to Standing Order number 231, I shall now allow comments, observation, or clarification in relation to the petition for not more than 30 minutes. don't see any interest. Honorable Senators, pursuant to Standing Order number 2321, the petition is hereby committed to the Standing Committee on Agriculture, Livestock, and Fisheries for its consideration. In terms of Standing Order number 2322, the committee is required in not more than 60 calendar days from the time of reading the prayer to respond to the petitioners by way of a report addressed to the petitioners and laid on the table of the Senate. I thank you. Next order.
Order number 5, papers.
Leader.
The Speaker, sir, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the Senate today, 28th April 2022. Report of the Auditor General on the financial statement of Noltresh Loitoktok Water and Sanitation Company Limited for the year ended 30th June 2018. 2. Report of the Auditor General on the financial statement of Noltresh Loitoktok Water and Sanitation Company Limited for the year ended 30th June 2019. 3. Report of the Auditor General on the financial statement of Noltresh Loitoktok Water and Sanitation Company Limited for the year ended 30th June 2020. 3. The report of the Auditor General on the financial statement of Narok Water and Sewerage Services Company Limited for the year ended 30th June 2019. 5. Report of the Auditor General of the financial statement of Samburu County Executive Bursaries for the year ended 30th June 2019. 6. The report of the Auditor General on the financial statement of Baringo County Micro and Small Enterprise Fund for the year ended 30th June 2020. 7. Report of the Auditor General on the financial statement of Kericho County Emergency Fund for the year ended 30th June 2015. 8. Report of the Auditor General on the financial statement of Kericho County Emergency Fund for the year ended 30th June 2016. 9. A report of the Auditor General on the financial statement of Kericho County Emergency Fund for the year ended 30th June 2017. 10. Report of the Auditor General on the financial statement of Kericho County Emergency Fund for the year ended 30th June 2018. And I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, statements.
Okay, the Chairperson, Standing Committee on Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries. Not there, deferred. The Chairperson, Standing Committee on Devolution and Intergovernmental Relations. Not there. The Chairperson, Standing Committee on Education. Not there, so the statements stand deferred. The next statement is by the Leader of Majority.
Mr. Speaker, sir, pursuant to Standing Order 52.1, I hereby present to the Senate the business of the House for the week commencing Wednesday, 4th of May, 2022. Let me take this opportunity to welcome honorable members back from April recess and look forward to another fruitful session over the next few weeks. Mr. Speaker, sir, as we're all aware, Tuesday, 3rd May, 2022 has been gazetted to be a public holiday to mark Eid al-Fitr, the end of the holy month of Ramadan. In this respect, I take this opportunity to wish all Muslims Eid al-Fitr. Likewise, Friday, 29 April 2022 has been gazetted to be the public holiday for the state funeral service for former President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency the late Honorable Mwai Kibaki, CGH. I take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to say thank you to all honorable members or senators who gave their tribute through the motion that was concluded yesterday, expressing the condolences of the Senate on the demise of the former president. Speaker, sir, regular sittings of Senate will therefore resume on Wednesday, 4th May 2022. On that day, the Senate Business Committee will meet to schedule the business of the Senate, which is projected to contain business that will not be concluded from today's order paper and any other business scheduled by the committee. The order paper for Thursday, 5th May 2022 will contain business that will not be concluded on Wednesday, 4th May, as well as motions, petitions, statements, and any other business as directed by the Senate Business Committee. There are 18 bills at the second reading stage. Upon first reading of the bills at orders number 8 today, orders of number 8 and 9 from today's order paper, this number will change to 20. 6 of these bills have been listed in today's order paper for division at orders number 8 and to 13. However, 7 bills at the second reading stage have been dropped from the program of Senate business pursuant to Standing Order 59.3 due to unavailability of movers when the orders were called out, and are therefore not available for debate. I urge the respective movers to make requests to the Honorable Speaker for the bills to be reinstated in the program of the Senate business. On the other hand, there are 11 bills that are at the Committee of the Whole stage, 6 of which have also been listed in today's order paper for division at orders number 16 to 21. As regards the divisions of the second reading and at the Committee of the Whole, I urge all senators to avail themselves for divisions and equally urge the movers of the bills, committee chairpersons, and individual senators who have filed amendments to be in the chamber for the House to smoothly transition to the next stage. Mr. Speaker, sir, other business before the Senate include 48 petitions and statements pursuant to Standing Orders 47 and 48. There are important tools of oversight, and I urge concerned committees to hasten consideration of these pending businesses and to table reports pursuant to the standing orders. The Speaker, sir, allow me in conclusion to thank all senators for the dedication and commitment they have continued to exhibit in their work in service to the people of Kenya, and urge that we all continue to do the same during this part of the Senate calendar. I thank you and hereby lay the statement on the table. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Agnes Suzani, you have an intervention.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allow me just to make some observations after that statement in terms of an input to thank the Majority Leader for issuing a statement on the business of Senate for the week commencing Wednesday 4th, and also to indicate, as he has indicated, that we have 11 bills in the Committee of the Whole and quite a number of bills on the order paper in the Committee of the Whole. Of course, we have our order paper, which clearly indicates exactly what's meant to happen in the Committee of the Whole and the amendments we need to make. Mr. Speaker, this House and this session specifically, I think, will be remembered as one of the houses that came up with quite a number of bills touching on various facets of importance, be it agriculture, be it community health services, be it to do with various health, for example, irrigation amendment bill. We have it on the order paper, and various bills. Mr. Speaker, we are at a time when we are moving to Senate Sendai, but I think it's important for us to find a way to be able to get together and expedite and get these bills moved out. It'll help. Quite a number of them are almost at the stage of finalization, Mr. Speaker. For example, the Community Health Services Bill right now is at the National Assembly, and they might not have very many more amendments to add on to it, which means it might not need mediation and it might come to the Senate. It's still possible to get most of these bills signed into acts. And I think the main thing is just the division, being able to vote for them, because, Mr. Speaker, we know in the Senate we all vote according to our counties, And indeed, most of the issues that we resolve in the Senate are issues that we agree across the board for all the counties. Indeed, most of the times we've been able to get the 24 delegations who are able to vote expeditiously for this. So I think as we move towards the end, Mr. Speaker, it's just to encourage ourselves and to really be able to even use the hybrid methodology, especially for the voting. And then also on the other point on bills being reinstated, Mr. Speaker, I think this is very important for the bills and business that has been dropped, where possible, where application can be made to be considered for reinstatement, so that the work that has been put either by the individual senator or at the committee level is not entirely lost. So we appreciate this statement, and as we get ready for the business starting the 4th, we're getting ready, bracing ourselves as senators to finish the business that is scheduled in this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. I guess we have heard. We'll try our level best to see what we can conclude. And like I did mention, if necessary, we'll use the hybrid to be able to get the votes so that most of them are voted for. Next order.
Order number 8, the Elections Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bills number 3 of 2022, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to amend the Elections Act. Order number 9, the Election Campaign Financing Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bills number 37 of 2021, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to amend the Election Campaign Financing Act and for connected purposes.
Okay, honorable senators, I think for the convenience of the House, I'm rearranging the order paper so that we start with order number 24 and 25. So next order.
Order number 24, the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bills number 32 of 2021, second reading.
Leader of Majority.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment Bill 2021, National Assembly Bills number 32 of 2021, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, the bill, in a short history of the bill was published on the 11th of June 2021, passed by the National Assembly and referred to the Senate on the 22nd of February 2022. The purpose of the bill is to amend the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act to address the challenges faced by procuring entities in implementing the Act, including the multiple awards of contracts in the wake of Sections 82 and 86 of the Act. Speaker, challenges have been witnessed in procurement processes, particularly in regards to awarding of contracts. These challenges relate to the allegations of unfairness in evaluating contracts, including non-disclosure of evaluation criteria and whether the contracts were evaluated properly. These challenges have largely come from bidders who have made a substantial investment in the contracting process and are seeking to recover their costs. This bill attempts to cure this challenge or these challenges, and its passage is paramount, Mr. Speaker, in streamlining the procurement processes in Kenya. Speaker, sir, the bill specifically proposes the following. And Clause 2 of the bill proposes to amend Section 2 of the Act by amending the definition of procurement profession to recognize other institutions who offer membership and professional qualifications in procurement and supply chain management. Further to this, the bill proposes to introduce the definition of a local contractor into the Act to pave way for the inclusion of sole proprietorships, partnerships, cooperative societies, individual consultants, associations, and groups that are registered in Kenya. Speaker, Clause 3 of the bill contains proposals to amend Section 9 of the Act, among others, to address the training lacuna for the non-procurement professionals involved in procurement, such as the user departments, disposals, and contract implementation teams, suppliers, etc., etc. Speaker, on clause number 6 of the bill, that clause contains proposals to amend Section 40 of the Act to assign the Director General the responsibility to institute investigations pursuant to Section 35 of the Act. Clause 7 of the bill contains proposals to amend Section 41 of the Act by adding a new paragraph to provide for the provisions to reduce chances of delayed contracts by tenderers. Mr. Speaker, we proceed to Clause 8 of the bill, which proposes to amend the Act by introducing a new Section 43A to give the authority the power, when conducting investigations, inspections, assessments, and reviews relating to contracts, procurement, and asset disposal proceedings, to enter premises of the procuring entities to make any inquiries that may be necessary for the collection of information. Speaker, Clause 9 of the bill contains proposals to amend Section 44 of the Act by adding a new subsection to enable the accounting officer of a procuring entity to seek assistance from the National Treasury where that procuring entity lacks capacity to comply with the Act. Clause 10 of the bill proposes to amend Section 46 of the Act. Clause 10 of the bill proposes to amend Section 46 of the Act to allow the head of the procuring entity, the head of procurement, to delegate the secretarial function. The proposed amendment, Mr. Speaker, intends to enhance efficiency in delivery of public services and reduce procurement lead time, as procuring entities will be able to run multiple procurements or tenders concurrently. Clause 12 of the bill proposes to amend Section 48 of the Act by deleting the words procuring unit and substituting therefore the words head of procurement function. This is meant to ensure consistency with the definition and the role of the procurement function. Clause 14 of the bill seeks to amend Section 53 of the Act by empowering the head of the procurement function to carry out market surveys, to inform the placing of orders on decision-making on a procurement by the relevant awarding authority. The subject of this provision is to guide against purchasing standards, items at inflated prices. Speaker, Clause 17 of the bill seeks to amend Section 71 of the Act to correct the notion that a tenderer may seek clarification from the candidate, which is not feasible, as it is a procuring entity that is evaluating the candidates to determine their eligibility. Clause 23 of the bill seeks to amend Sections 96(2) and 4 of the Act to enable those Kenyans who have no access to newspapers and who would wish to participate in the tendering process. Speaker, that's very important. Clause 27 of the bill proposes to amend Section 119 of the Act to provide for the preparations of a notice inviting expressions of interest mandatory. Clause 28 of the bill provides proposals to amend Section 121 of the Act to clarify that it is the role of the evaluating committee or the evaluation committee to carry out evaluation and to align the provisions of Section 1214. Further to this, the proposed new subsection 5 is intended to unlock procurement process that might stall due to the failure to elicit the requisite number of qualified candidates or proposals. Clause 29 of the bill, Speaker proposes to amend Section 124 of the Act by deleting subsection 14, which contradicts the conditions of single sourcing provided under subsection 12. Further to this, the bill seeks to amend subsection 15 to enhance efficiency by eliminating the approval requirements before initiating a procurement process. The bill also seeks to amend a section by adding a new subsection 16 to uphold the principle of independence, where the regulator, the authority, should not involve itself in procuring entities' operational matters. Speaker, Clause 30 of the bill proposes to amend Section 138 of the Act by deleting subsection 5 and substituting thereof, therefore, a new subsection 5. This will ensure that the security organs report contracts processed through the open list maintained under subsection 90, subsection 4, for accountability within protecting national security interest. Speaker, Clause 31 of the bill seeks to amend subsection 139 of the Act to allow variations in terms of quantity which might be occasioned due to unforeseen circumstances within a period less than 12 months, provided the subject variations are within outlined limits or thresholds. Clause 32 of the bill seeks to amend Section 141 of the Act to facilitate multiple award of contracts. Clause 34 of the bill proposes to amend Section 169 of the Act by adding a new subsection 2 to waive filing fees for reviews for disadvantaged groups. Clause 35 of the bill contains the proposal to amend Section 172 of the Act to introduce further grounds for debarment. Clause 36 of the bill seeks to amend the Section 176 for proper cross-referencing. Clause 37 of the bill seeks to amend the first schedule by deleting paragraph 3, which contradicts provision of Section 10, subsection 1A of the Act, providing that the chairperson of the board is nominated by the Cabinet Secretary and appointed by the President. Clause 38 of the bill seeks to amend the second schedule by deleting paragraph 3, which contradicts provisions of Section 29 of the Act. And, Mr. Speaker, the last one is Clause 39 of the bill, which seeks to amend the third schedule for proper cross-referencing. Speaker, all these amendments look many, but very relevant, Speaker, to the Act. It does not change very much of what the Act is, but Mr. Speaker, introduces efficiency, introduces one way of dealing with the many complaints from business people, Mr. Speaker, who want to participate in contracts in whatever has been pronounced or announced. Mr. Speaker, we want this fairness to be felt by all, including, Mr. Speaker, those who come from far-flung parts of this country, who do not get access to newspapers. And so there must be a way of making sure that they are also not disadvantaged by being where they are. I therefore urge the honorable senators to consider and pass this important bill in order to ensure efficiency and effectiveness in the procuring processes or the procurement processes. And Mr. Speaker, let it go out there to those entities that do procurement that they will have to comply with the law and that they will have a new law which is much more user-friendly and assists to make sure that contracts are not delayed. I want to move, Mr. Speaker, and I'll ask Senator Zani to second. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I second that the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment Bill 2021 be read a second time. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important amendment bill that looks at an area that has caused a lot of inconveniences and a lot of processes for people who are procuring entities or who deal with procurement at any level, and really introduces quite a lot of procedures and sometimes hindrances that are being addressed by this amendment bill, Mr. Speaker. This is a National Assembly Bill number 32 of 2021 and gives specific areas for amendments that are going to be very, very critical to improve and create the level of efficiency that is needed. So it actually makes specific amends to the Act to ensure that these are put into processes and put properly into place. So the bill basically deals with the procurement processes and awarding of contracts, and delves onto an area of evaluation criteria, because sometimes most of the people who are procuring or the procuring entities start a process, but there's no clarity about what evaluation criteria has been put into place, and this creates quite a lot of anxiety. Mr. Speaker, starting with Clause 2, some specific definitions are put into place that are very, very key. For example, explaining the procurement professional and who that procurement professional is, by ensuring that it is very clear that any procurement or supply chain professional body is going to be the one that is recognized in Kenya. This expands the scope of the procurement professional, and that is very key. At B, there's insertions of various definitions that help, again, to make it easier to follow through the procurement process. And for example, complex and specialized contracts. This means contracts that include procurement where the terms and conditions of an agreement are different from standard commercial terms and conditions. And these in the past would be put away because they don't fit into the specific contracts and how they're expected to be stipulated. And then also introducing the terminology of a local contractor, meaning a person or firm registered in Kenya under the Companies Act 2015 or any other written law and whose operation is based in Kenya. This is very, very important also in terms of contextualizing and putting into place the possibility of also consideration by local contractors. At Clause 6, we have an amendment by deleting the word board appearing immediately after the words attention and substituting therefore the words Director General. Mr. Speaker, this creates a larger scope and gives the Director General specific responsibilities and specific deliverables which hold the Director General responsible specifically for them. So I think it moves the responsibility instead of a board, which can be amorphous, to specifically the Director General who has to be in charge for that particular process. At Clause 7, to reduce the chances of delay, a very important amendment is made there that is determined by the review board to have failed if, for example, in the Principal Act is amended in subsection by inserting the following new paragraph: is determined by the review board to have failed a request that is frivolous or vexatious or was made solely for the purpose of delaying the procurement processing or a performance of a contract. This reduces the chances of a delay by determining that right from the onset such a contract can be put into consideration and can be considered appropriately. At Clause 8, there's a very important provision that is put into place, and this is to be able to inspect the premises, Mr. Speaker. Many of the times where procurement processes have been put into place and an inspection has to be done, where a procurement entity does not want to really expose what they have in their premises, it's made easy because there wasn't, in effect, in the law, a possibility of enforcing it. And therefore, at clause 8, the provision for enforcing is put into place when conducting, especially in cases where investigations are being put into place, during investigations or inspections or assessments and reviews relating to contracts, procurement, and asset disposal procedures, anyone authorized by the authority may enter any premises of a procuring entity. Of course, specification is given at a reasonable time so that you don't find somebody is coming and doing this right at midnight, and inspect the premises to make any inquiries that may be necessary for the collection of information. I think this is very, very key, and it removes the shroud of secrecy that sometimes avails on procurement and procurement processes. Where an authorized person is refused entry, also specification is made about what can be done, and this includes getting a magistrate, an application for a magistrate to be able to to be able to make a ruling specifically of this. So at clause 8 of 2, where an authorized person is refused entry or is prevented from entering premises, a magistrate may, on application by the authority, issue a warrant authorizing the police to enter the premises using such force as may be reasonable necessary to conduct the search and obtain the required information. Mr. Speaker, this is one area where for a long time you might find that there's contradictory information. For example, even in terms of the capacity of the procuring entities, or in terms of the goods or any material that they have in place. And we find that once there isn't such control, that some sort of measure can be taken to ensure that some sort of investigation can be made, that people have access into those premises, that people can, for the longest time, be able to move up and down without giving the necessary information that is needed. It is very important to realize that, especially for procurement, both the non-professional procurement people and the local contractors become very key. And if these are not put into operation by putting very specific regulation for them or legislation for them, it will become very, very difficult for them. Again here, Mr. Speaker, the Director General plays a very, very important role in investigating these irregularities. So together with the procuring entities and together with magistrate order, certain investigation can be made and certain truth can be put into place. This is very, very key because, especially at clause 7, the reducing and ensuring that there is no delay in the contract. Once a contract is viable and can be given out, it needs to be able to be given out. So specifically, these clauses ensure that if there's any investigation matter, it is not left to the procuring entity itself, because then they can really delay and say that there's certain provision that is not still in place, there are certain paperwork that is not in place. Allowing this sort of investigation and enabling possibilities of such investigation makes it possible for the procuring entity to be investigated and to be able to move on to do what they're expected to do. The authority and power, therefore, of entering into these premises is very, very key and very, very important. And it's very, very important in terms of ensuring that some sort of complexity is not taken into consideration, or somebody is not able to proceed for a long time without being able to do what is required of them, especially when we come to ensuring that there's efficiency, because this is a public service. These provisions become very, very key and very, very important. We have amendments also that ensure that the regulatory authority is not able to over-influence and to be able to overstep, that they also have limitations about the powers that they have in place, and that they cannot just be able to move as an authority to put into place specifications that might not be ideal in specific situations. Mr. Speaker, even when we go to clauses like 13, for example, which are amending the Principal Act by making sure that, for example, upon submission of the procurement plans to the National Treasury, pursuant to Section 442C of this Act, the accounting officer of a procuring entity shall publish and publicize its approved procurement plan as invitation to treat on its website, so that the National Treasury also has a role to play, and also the transparency of using even the websites is very, very key. And Mr. Speaker, this brings me to a related issue of also something that we need to be able to do within the Senate and within counties, of empowering the young people even to understand these procurement processes. Mr. Speaker, during some of the visits that we made into various counties, I think it was to Uasin Gishu County, when we were going for our Senate Mashinani, we were able to find hubs, youth hubs, technological hubs, ICT hubs, to help specifically the young people to be able to understand how that procurement is meant to be done, and especially the procurement and awarding that targets women and the youth at 30 and 30%. Without that sort of training and exposure, becomes very, very difficult for them to be able to put into place. And therefore, once these procurement plans have been submitted to the procuring entity, the National Treasury publishes and publicizes the procurement plans as invitation to treat on the state tender portal. So this makes it very, very transparent, that once you've been allowed or invited to tender or to procure, then this is going to go on the state tender plan, and this will, to a large extent, Mr. Speaker, reduce the level of secrecy and the level of not understanding, because most of the time people say, but I qualified for this particular procurement, why wasn't I awarded? Very important even to indicate where you haven't been awarded. What were the problems? What were the shortcomings? And indeed, how can those be improved? So this level of transparency and openness will get us to that place where it becomes possible to really put it out there. At clause 14, the head of procurement function shall carry out market surveys to inform the placing of orders or decision making on a procurement by relevant awarding authority. This is the sort of education that we need to be able to put into place. The market surveys, the state tender portal, the understanding of this process will make it viable. Right now, Mr. Speaker, you find that most of the people who tend to procure tend to be the same people. Some of them have accomplished, they have been able to understand the skill, they're able to quickly apply and bid for these tenders, and they're able to quickly get them. While there's another category who for the longest time will try to attempt to do this and they're not able to, and this creates a lot of problems. So the head of procurement function shall carry out market surveys, and this becomes very, very critical. And other things, for example, to ensure that, for example, the Principal Act is amended by inserting the words "and delegation of responsibility" immediately after the words "procurement approvals," to ensure that the levels of responsibilities are carried at the various delegation levels within the Act, so that it is not a one-man show, it is actually responsibilities that are cutting across. At clause 19, the Principal Act is also amended, and especially in the Act itself at 82, subject to the subsection of this section, the tender sum as submitted and read out during the tender opening shall be absolute and final. This, Mr. Speaker, is very critical, because sometimes people are able to get insider information, and they're able to adjust their documents according to the information that is coming through. But enabling transparency and being able to have those figures right into place is very, very key. Shall be absolute and final, and shall not be the subject of correction, revision, adjustment, or amendment in any way, because this creates inequalities where certain category have received information and they've been told it's important for you to either downgrade or upgrade your figures, then that creates unfairness. So when this becomes something that is public, everybody is able to see how the tender documents look like, and these cannot be changed. And for the avoidance of doubt, the provisions of subsection shall apply. That is the regulations that have been put into place to ensure the transparency of these tenders is enhanced at the various stages. Mr. Speaker, the bill has various clauses. All in all, as the mover of this bill said, it's really to create efficiency of public service, to create efficiency, especially in the process of procurement. It's meant to encourage, enhance, and almost create a burst in terms of the interest in procurement, which is very, very key. Mr. Speaker, even as we've been analyzing and talking about the various counties, this is one issue that always stands out. The issue of procurement, who is awarded the procurement, whether there is a relationship between the people who are awarded this procurement, because this can be a game changer, Mr. Speaker, and especially within devolution when we're talking about spurring the economic growth of the counties, spurring on-source revenue, being able to ensure that once you've won the tender, you can actually carry it through. And Mr. Speaker, we know various cases of people who have been sure, for example, that they will be awarded a certain tender, or they're moving towards being awarded a certain tender, and then suddenly they've actually tried to get their assets changed into money assets so that they can be able to utilize this, or they have actually gotten a procurement, they have actually delivered, but when it comes to the time for their remuneration for those particular tenders, there are crisscrosses and problems that make it such a process. And we know of very many families, we've known of very many procurement entities that have ended up being disadvantaged as a result, to the extent that you find that somebody's savings or something that they put behind is actually taken away completely. And many of these are addressed, for example, Mr. Speaker, at clause 28, deleting of the words accounting officer of a procuring entity appearing immediately after the word the, and substituting here for the words evaluation committee. An evaluation committee now will have to be put into place, which now the responsibility is not just accounting officer. This is amorphous of a procuring entity. The accounting officer for procuring entity, now the emphasis will be on the evaluation committee. That evaluation committee can actually go through the specific outputs that have been put in terms of the processes for those for those tenders, and to ensure that that evaluation committee is very, very transparent. I think it is from the evaluation committee that they'll be able to move into the exposure of putting out everything into the websites so that everybody might be able to see and understand what is going on. Mr. Speaker, the authority is given a lot of responsibilities in this amendment bill, and at clause 29 of the amendment bill, the authority shall issue written directions and guidelines governing the reporting requirements of the use of alternate selection methods, because especially when deviation is done and alternate methods are going to be used as a selection method by the accounting officers, it's very, very important to have these as written and these guidelines put into place so that one person is not held responsible. This is the work of the authority, and the level of authority, they will have to issue written directions and guidelines governing the reporting requirements for use of alternative selection, where an alternative selection is entered into. Why? The written direction and guidelines need to be put into place. This will reduce levels of favoritism. This will also enhance the level of transparency that is expected at the level of the authority. Mr. Speaker, we know in many of the legislation that we put forth, the authority become the regulatory bodies who are very, very key in ensuring. So the regulator or the regulating authority will not be able to have an influence, and our mover was very clear about this, that the authority now will have some sort of control. And many times, Mr. Speaker, we find many of the authorities have their own unwritten rules and standards, and we don't have a way to query what it is that they do. In fact, Mr. Speaker, now that we're talking about authorities, most of these authorities are put in place by acts. They read through the legislation, understand it, but hardly is there a review of some of their processes and how they should do them, especially where some sort of gaps might be created. So where there's an alternate process that has to be entered into, then very, very key to be able to explain exactly the why, so that it isn't something that is just being put into place. At 31, Mr. Speaker, again, there are various amendments. For example, where an accounting officer of a procuring entity on the recommendation of an evaluation committee or prescribed in the signed contract may approve the request for. So these are some of the specific, for example, use of prime costs, use of contingencies, reimbursables, costs, and use of provisional sums. So that gives the basis for the alternative processes that can be used and the explanation of the same whereof, Mr. Speaker. And at clause 31 also, at 31.4, for the purpose of this section, any variation of a contract could, 2 minutes please, Mr. Speaker, so that I sum.
Okay, summarize. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Maybe 5 more minutes if you can.
Okay, thank you. So for the purposes of this section, variation of a contract shall only be considered. I think this is very, very important. We are Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. We know ourselves. Where variation is introduced without putting boundaries for that variation, before you know it, it becomes, instead of healing an issue, it becomes actually the issue itself. So clause 31, I think, is a very thought out clause that goes to explain the purposes of the variation. And under this section, any variation of a contract shall only be considered if the following are satisfied. The price variation from the original price, so that, for example, if you've already quoted for one price and you've quoted for the other, you can say, well, petrol cost went up in between and therefore there's a justification for a change, or there was a war that happened in between. There has to be some sort of justification. From the original price is based on prevailing consumer price index obtained by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. The quantity variation for goods does not exceed 15%. That is the capping, so that you don't have an open-ended quantity variation. You had requested, or the request is for 30 bags of a particular product, and now you're varying up to more than the 15%. It should not exceed more than 50%. So the variation should be within limits plus or minus 15%. The price or quantity variation is to be executed within a period of the contract, so that, again, forces of the market economy do not come into place. The cumulative value of all contract variations for goods do not result in an increment of the total contract long term, which then way surpasses even the figure that had been put in the first place, and that the cumulative value of the professional services does not result in an increment of the total contract prices by more than 25%. Those provisions are very, very important, Mr. Speaker, really just to guide, and especially where the bill, the amendment bill proposes for amendment, that amendment is put into place. Also, the method for computing price variation under the section that shall be prescribed in regulations. This is very key, so that now the regulations can really make sure that thorough follow-up can be put into place under any circumstances. Remember, Mr. Speaker, there will also be an authority. Remember, Mr. Speaker, the CS office will also be part and parcel of this. So through this sort of tight, jacketed procedures, then it's possible for us to be able to look at the procuring entity and the provision that they have to go through, and they should be comfortable that the award for that procurement has been done within the basics of the particular act. Mr. Speaker, I wish to stop there and just say the following clauses up to from 32, 33, for example, given further provisions there. 34, which is also talking about renumbering and existing provisions, a subsection, and inserting a new section, notwithstanding the provisions of subsection 1, filing fees for review by candidates under reserved procurements for, this is what I was talking about, Mr. Speaker, for women, youth, and persons with disabilities and other disadvantaged groups may be waived by the Secretary, or where required fees shall be as prescribed. So the provision, which is very, very key in terms of filing fees, and we know, Mr. Speaker, and we've talked to various groups, and I think I see Senator Sakaja in the House. He's also dealt with this within the Labour Committee. A lot of complaints have come that even despite the 30%, you're looking at person with disability, for example, a person PWD, a person living with disability. This person might not be able, just the filing itself of the fees and other disadvantaged groups, for example, women and youth, might not be able to do that. So I welcome the possibility of a waiver of, or also consideration of filing charges. Remember, it's just a filing charge. It's not even that the tender has been awarded. It has not been, it might not be to you. And yet already this cost goes without it getting reimbursed, so to speak. So it's important maybe to even make considerations at procedures which can allow waivers, and maybe if there's any sort of figures that need to be paid later on after they have actually benefited from this procurement process, then maybe they might be able to be introduced later. Mr. Speaker, for as long as that is not put into place, the provision of women, youth and persons becomes a hindrance instead of a way to empowering these groups, and I think that has been the intention, and I welcome this amendment. And I want to end there, Mr. Speaker, especially on this great amendment of addressing the needs of the women, the youth, and the persons with disability. This amendment bill also has the first schedule, the second schedule, and the third schedules, which are here in attached, but the fact that there will be key regulations to help the implementation of this, I think clearly puts us in a situation where we are addressing an issue that we've dealt with for a long time in Kenya, procurement, and addressing it to a satisfaction that will make this process smooth and create the efficiency that is so desired by these amendments. Mr. Speaker, I beg to second. Thank you.
Honorable Senators, I now propose the question, which is that the Public Procurement and Assets Disposal Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 32 of 2021, be read a second time. Senator Sakaja.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this amendment bill, the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment Bill 2021, that has come to us from the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act is one of the most important pieces of law we have in our country, but it's also one of the most abused. It's an extensive statute that many times, Mr. Speaker, if you look at audit reports of our counties, if you look at the Auditor General's reports of the national government ministries and state agencies, you find a lot of violation of both this Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act, as well as the PFM, Public Finance Management law. And Mr. Speaker, of course, a lot of these violations are deliberate by accounting officers in both national and county entities because of different interest, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a law that for me was my first piece of legislation in the National Assembly, where we introduced the provisions for 30% preferential and reserved procurement for young people, for women and persons with disability. Mr. Speaker, I'll speak to that in detail, but that was indeed a long process. In fact, the initial version of that amendment was returned by the President. Then we had to negotiate, and finally we came up with a law that we believed would essentially provide a lot of opportunities and hope for our young people, for women, for persons with disability, who for the longest time have been at the periphery of public procurement, have not been able to engage with government, and have not been able to benefit in terms of doing business with government. Mr. Speaker, just quickly looking at some of the provisions, and I won't highlight all of them, those which are of interest to me. Mr. Speaker, if you start with the amendment of Section 9, Mr. Speaker, the amendment in Section 9 is an important amendment. It talks about the functions of the authority, of the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority. Remember, we used to have public procurement, I think PPA, the name was changed to this PPRA. And the functions are extensive, but what we are adding, or rather what is being added by the mover, Senator Pogisio, is that one of the functions of the authority then becomes to develop, promote, and support the training and capacity development of persons involved in procurement and asset disposal. Mr. Speaker, this is extremely important, especially for these groups that we're talking about. For the longest time, public procurement has been a reserve or a preserve of a few connected tenderpreneurs who have mastered the system. They know how to fill in those documents, they know what is coming up, they know how to get the information, and information is power. And they're the only ones who have access to this information. Mr. Speaker, I remember in 2016, after having passed the 30% law, I put an advertisement in the newspaper through the Young Parliamentarians Association, which I was chairing then, and I still chair, inviting interested young people who are interested in understanding how to procure. I thought we'd use a small room at the Nairobi Safari Club, which we booked. Mr. Speaker, we expected around 200 participants. There were more than 3,000. In fact, we had to move the meeting to the University of Nairobi because there were very many interested young people. And let me tell you, these are not the kind, you know, when you mobilize young people for a meeting, a political meeting, these ones who came were very different. There were young people who had a lot of hope. They were professionals, they had registered businesses, they had been trying, they all had stories of how they had been trying to do it, but they were not getting opportunities, Mr. Speaker. Apart from that, we had to do other sessions across the country and even in the county. I remember holding one in Embakasi Central at the disease place, which is the confluence of Embakasi West, Umoja, and Embakasi Central across Mama Lucy Hospital. Again, it was packed. And they wanted information. They were not interested in politics. They were not interested in handouts. They didn't want to be given money after the meeting. They just wanted information. And I remember going along with a lady who at that time was in charge of the secretariat at the National Treasury. In this law, we created a secretariat for AGPO to actually assist young people. But I realized that we might need, and I'll be introducing this amendment in third reading, that secretariat should not be domiciled at the Ministry of Finance, at Treasury. It should be domiciled in the ministry in charge of youth, gender, and youth and gender issues, because that is where they're concerned about these people. In the Treasury, it is just one of many departments that never gets prominence, never gets attention. That department ideally should be the one conducting these trainings, going around the country, calling our young people, calling women, giving them encouragement, telling them how to fill a tender document, how to do the technical, bit of the tender, how to do the financial aspect of it, so that they can also get these opportunities, Mr. Speaker. So I really support that provision. I think it is important. In Section 41, Mr. Speaker, there's an amendment again at Section 41, which is also important because we've seen a lot of government projects, even counties, where because somebody does not get the tender, they then hold the entire process through a lot of frivolous litigation. And over here we're talking about debarment, that the board shall debar a person from participating in procurement or asset disposal proceedings on the ground that the person and what is being inserted is determined by the review board to have filed a request that is frivolous or vexatious or was made solely for the purpose of delaying the procurement proceedings for performance of a contract. Mr. Speaker, I recently asked for the compendium of stalled government projects. They are amounting to more than 1 trillion shillings of projects that have stopped because of litigation, because of diversion of those funds, because many of accounting, the accounting, how do you call them? The procuring entities or those in charge, once they have done, they've initialized procurement, and maybe that is the process, the time at which they get a kickback or whatnot, they then lose interest in it. So they initiate, they tell someone, we'll give you this tender, they get the 10%, and then the project stalls. They've gotten their money, and it does not go on. Mr. Speaker, we need personal culpability for that. So on top of that, we're saying that these companies, and they're known, they're those who are notorious for, always going to challenge, and on very frivolous grounds, Mr. Speaker, they can now be debarred if it is determined by the board, by the review board, not just the regulatory authority, but the review board, that they have been engaging in frivolous and vexatious, requests to the entities, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we also talk about the issue of, when you look at Section 43, the amendment here in Clause 8, Mr. Speaker, is about inspections, assessments, and reviews relating to contracts, procurements, and asset disposal proceedings. Mr. Speaker, the proposal is then to insert a new section that says, Mr. Speaker, that the authority, giving the authority to enter premises when conducting investigations, inspections, assessments, and reviews relating to contracts, procurement, and asset disposal proceedings. Anyone authorized by the authority may enter the premises of a procuring entity, of course at a reasonable time, with reasonable notice, to make these inquiries. We've seen many of them being blocked, being stopped, including in some of the very high-profile investigations that have happened recently, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a problem with Section 44, or rather Clause 9, which amends Section 44, which talks about the responsibilities of an accounting officer. Mr. Speaker, the parent act here, Mr. Speaker, talks about Section 44, it provides that an accounting officer of a public entity is primarily responsible for ensuring that the entity complies with the act. That is okay. Then it says, in performance of this responsibility, the accounting officer then has some responsibilities. One, they ensure that the procurement is within approved budget, so you don't procure beyond budget. Number two, constitute all disposal committees and procurement in accordance with this act, and the different other responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, the amendment here is that where a public entity lacks capacity to comply with this act, an accounting officer shall seek assistance from the National Treasury. Mr. Speaker, the mischief then is that you're creating a loophole where if it is not because they lack capacity, but they want to bypass provisions, and then they go to Treasury and use that as an excuse, Mr. Speaker, and they can collude with officials in the Treasury. Mr. Speaker, I think this law needs to be followed as it is. Let us increase or rather work on the capacity and enable procuring entities to be able to follow this law, because when you create such a loophole, then they find an excuse not to bypass some of these provisions by referring to the National Treasury. Mr. Speaker, when you go to another one, which of course, Mr. Speaker, was of concern to me, is in Section 51 of the Parent Act. So Clause 12 of the amendment talks about deleting procurement and disposal unit after the words establish and substitute with procurement function. Mr. Speaker, it is important to have that. Of course, it's a cleanup. Section 51 of the Act talks about procuring agents and asset disposal agents, and subsection 2 says that a procuring entity may not appoint a procuring or asset disposal agent unless that procuring entity demonstrates lack of internal capacity, provides evidence of inability to establish a procurement and disposal unit, and demonstrates the inability to use the services of other state organs or public entities. So this provision deletes the word procurement and disposal unit and replaces it with procurement function, so it is not necessarily a unit. Mr. Speaker, Section 53 is extremely important. Section 53 is where we started inserting that in the year 2015. We started inserting the provisions that then will enable young people, women, and PWDs to be incorporated or featured in public procurement. Mr. Speaker, Section 53 of the Act talks about procurement and asset disposal planning. That at the beginning of a financial year, Mr. Speaker, there shall be that procurement plan that is then prepared. And in that procurement plan, Mr. Speaker, we said that the procuring entity or the accounting officer shall also demonstrate how within that procurement plan they're going to provide for preferences and reservations that take care of these young people and persons with disability and women, Mr. Speaker. What it is saying then, Mr. Speaker, in 12, we're inserting a new section that says that upon submission of this procurement plan to the National Treasury pursuant to Section 44, 2C, The accounting officer of a procuring entity shall publish and publicize its approved procurement plan as an invitation to treat on its website. Mr. Speaker, access to this information is what has been lacking. There are certain few special people who have been working the system, who are the only ones who understand what procurement plans county governments have, national government entities have, and I've seen very few. And I want to applaud, for instance, the governor of Makueni, because he's one of those who had very transparent publishing of his procurement plans, Mr. Speaker, amongst very few others. Without this information, you cannot expect these businesses owned by our young people and those special groups to be able to compete effectively without information. So this is a great introduction that once it is submitted to the National Treasury, then it's publicized on its website as an invitation to treat. In legal terms, an invitation to treat is a beginning, is one of contract, how to start a contract, that you've said, look, in this financial year, these are the things we're going to be thinking about. These are the areas we need to procure in terms of recurrent, in terms of development, and so prepare yourself, plan around that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, further to that, in section 54, which talks about pricing and requirement not to split of contracts, Mr. Speaker, it says that no procuring entity may structure procurement as two or more procurements for the purpose of avoiding the use of a procurement procedure, except where prescribed. This provision has been abused by many county governments, where you know that beyond a certain amount, it must be an open tender, and you need to go through the process. So they split those contracts. So if it is a 10 million one, they do 10 of them of 1 million, which now they do directly, Mr. Speaker. Yet there's a provision here that is very clear that you cannot structure as two or more procurements for the purpose of avoiding the use of the procedures except where is prescribed. Now the insertion, which comes under subsection 2, is that then that the head of a procuring entity or function shall carry out market surveys to inform the placing of orders or decision making on a procurement by the relevant awarding authority. And then in 2B, that for infrastructure projects, the head of the procurement function in liaison then with the head of the technical unit function of a procuring entity shall then prepare a market survey at the beginning of every financial year of the cost of goods and services, and thereafter prepare current cost handbook, which must be publicized, and thereafter prepare current cost handbook to be for the use in decision making, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is extremely important for us. So that this information is available, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can see, I don't know how many more minutes those are. 5 more minutes, Mr. Speaker. There are many other amendments here that really are of cleaning, or rather, you can call it what? Editorial review, just to sort out where there have been mistakes. But I want to go straight now to the area of real interest, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that must be section 165, 66. There was a reason why we struggled to get those provisions. Many procuring entities in this country have treated our young people and women as if the provisions of this act are a mere suggestion, Mr. Speaker. The 30% procurement. And we thought, if you look at the budget we have in our counties and in the national government, if 30% of the procurement budget, and by the 30% is not number of contracts, it is value of procurement, which people must really understand. If that amount of money goes to the hands of our young people and of women and of persons with disability, Mr. Speaker, especially our young people, a lot of the social ills we are seeing would not be there. And that is where, Mr. Speaker, we can actually integrate properly the bottom-up philosophy. That we make sure that at the lowest level in the world, we've created entities, we've created companies, we've created circles, we've created, our young people and women into groups that can actually be able to procure a service or goods with government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the opposite of that, the top down is just a few big, wealthy entrepreneurs holding all of government procurement. Mr. Speaker, that is a provision no one, despite your political side, can have a problem with. That we empower our young people. That the young people at the lowest level in Nyamira, in a ward, in South Mugirango, or wherever it is, can actually be enabled and trained, given the provisions up there, to do business with the government. Mr. Speaker, since I am the author and the what do you call it, the father of 30%, for instance, because I brought that law, Senator Abshiro, even if you look at me like that, I'm the one who brought that law in 2015. The reason I want to become a governor is that the laws we have done in this house, and I've brought a lot of laws from 2013 to date, are not being implemented by the executive at the national level and the county level. So I assure young people and women in Nairobi County, this will be the headquarters of 30%. This will be because they have the capacity, they have the ability, they have gone to school, they have these companies, and will enable them to form those companies, Mr. Speaker. But the Senate has actually been a stumbling block, and I've said repeatedly, because when we brought that law, we said that every 6 months, every procuring entity shall give a report to the PPRA outlining the number of contracts and tenders they've given to young people, to women and persons with disability, and the Senate committee and the National Assembly committee that is charged with the equalization of opportunities shall then, Mr. Speaker, bring that report and table in this house a list of shame of the county governments, of the government ministries at the national level that have failed to implement, Mr. Speaker, the provisions of 30%, Mr. Speaker, because it is extremely important. In fact, at some point, and I thank the former Chief of Staff at State House, we went and had a meeting, and he said, look, they're incorporating it in performance contracting. That part of the performance contracting to be given to the accounting officers at the national level and state agencies would include their performance when it comes to 30%. But it is not being done. We even said further in this law that the account, and I'm looking for that specific provision, that the actual account that shall be used in by those companies, the mandatory signatory shall be that youth or that woman. Because what we've seen is that these big entrepreneurs create fake companies. They get a few young people to be in the list of shareholders. Those young people pretend to go and procure something. But at the end of the day, it is them who are running the bank accounts. It is them who are receiving that money. So they're just using these young people. That is another abused provision. So the one I was referring to in Article 157, which is the law that I then introduced, 14, is that the authority shall make a report to Parliament every 6 months for consideration by the relevant committee responsible for equalization of opportunities. Mr. Speaker, kindly just a few more minutes as I wind up.
Okay, yeah, try to wind up maybe 5 more.
Thank you. I was waiting for you to say less because you gave Dr. Zani 5. But I know you believe in bottom up personally. You believe in it, so you'll hear this. That the relevant committee responsible for equalization of opportunities for youth, women, and persons with disability, the report shall contain details of the procuring entities and how they have complied with the provisions of this section. And Mr. Speaker, since we came to this house, we have never received this report. I have asked for it without fail. Senator Shionga's committee of equalization, it's called Cohesion and Equalization of Opportunities, which I chaired in the last house, because then it was a joint committee of both houses, has never brought that report. We are doing a great disservice to our young people and to our women and to persons with disability. There's a day, Mr. Speaker, I was at an establishment, and a young person came and said, your entire bill and that of your people is on me, and here's 100,000 shillings. I refused because I thought I'm being bribed. So I asked him, why would you do that? And he said that he just dared to try because of 30%. He just dared to try doing a procurement, and to date he is supplying the Ministry of Defense, Mr. Speaker. Those success stories need to be shown, because when you ask young people, how many of you have registered a company or have tried to tender, they say, oh no, I have not. Why? Because we hear it is hard. But have you registered? No, we've not registered. Have you tried? We have not tried. I want to encourage our young people, wherever they are. It is very easy to give up and not believe and not to try. But it just takes one step to sit down. These days, business registration is very easy. You don't need to pay a lawyer, Senator Mogeni and his crew and his ilk, who used to register businesses for a lot of money. These days, you can just do, the templates are there. You can do it for a very small amount of money. Register those companies. If you're in Nairobi County, after August the 9th, I will give you a chance to procure. If you're in counties with forward-thinking governors, like the incoming governor of Bungoma, I'm sure they will get an opportunity when His Excellency Lusaka is the governor to procure. Your young people in Kandui, in Kimilili, in Tongaren can actually do something with the government, and not just newspapers and flowers or bush clearing. They can actually do contracts. They can do roads, Mr. Speaker, because either way, when you give this contract to the big people, they use those young people to do the work. The people who know how to do those roads actually our youth. Mr. Speaker, contracts like garbage collection in Nairobi County will be for young people. Contracts like even, building some of our roads in the estates will be for our young people. Cleaning up our areas will be for our young people. Because you give somebody with his big tambi, he sits in his office, he does nothing. He doesn't drive that vehicle, he doesn't drive that forklift, he just gets the same young people who understand how to use that machinery. Let us build enterprise. Let us build our MSMEs. Mr. Speaker, that is one of the strong pillars that we believe in Kenya Kwanza, that we must do. If you look at the 4 pillars, there's agriculture, there's MSMEs, there's affordable housing, and Mr. Speaker, universal health care. This housing we're talking about, who should do those contracts? To do the doors, the windows, the plumbing. If you look at the project in Gara, Mr. Speaker, it's our young people. But we're giving these contracts to huge tenderpreneurs who, Mr. Speaker, exploit these young people. So again, I say, this is one of the most important pieces of legislation we have in our country, but the most abused. And I want to appeal to every leader in this country, in the executive, no matter which political party, no matter which political divide, the future of our country will be guaranteed when we ensure our young people and women are actually mainstreamed right into the center of public procurement, so that it is not a reserve of a few. That is how we create opportunities for all. Equality of opportunities. We cannot have this cohesion or this umoja that people are talking about without equalizing opportunities for all. That no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, you know you can have a chance, a fair shot at life, that you can actually do business with government, Mr. Speaker. And we expect that Kenyans will vote in leaders who are forward-thinking in that way. The specific provision is 157.5 that says an accounting officer or procuring entity shall, in processing procurement, reserved a prescribed percentage of its procurement budget, not quantity, budget, which shall be not less than 30% to the disadvantaged group, and comply with the provision of this Act and the regulations in respect of preferences and reservations. Then after that is done, Mr. Speaker, the other important law which we passed in this House, which I sponsored with Senator Faria, is prompt payment. Then after you've given them the contracts and the tenders, pay them promptly, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know of young people who suffered so much. For instance, when there was the UNCTAD, the KICC fiasco, there's even a lady who committed suicide. The young people who have then gotten these contracts and women, and then you don't pay them, and then they're auctioned, they are worse off than even you having not have given them that tender in the first place. You'd rather not have given it to them. Because then auctioneers are coming, they're taken further back than where they were before we gave them that tender. I want to appeal to our brothers and sisters in the National Assembly, our neighbors. Please process that bill that was passed by the Senate, the prompt payment law. Mr. Speaker, when that is done, I will be happy my legislative work is done. Because we did this 30% procurement, then we've done prompt payment law. And for those who are not engaging in business, we also sponsored the National Employment Authority. All of those, Mr. Speaker, are geared towards looking at economic empowerment for our people. This season we are in is about economic empowerment. Let no one fool anyone that it's about anything else. It's about economic opportunities for each and every Kenyan, starting from the lowest level, from the bottom to the top. And it is not bottom versus up. It is bottom going up. We take them from down, we take them up, Mr. Speaker. Once we do that, we're going to transform our country. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to support this law. The other provisions, of course, are still important. But ideally, Mr. Speaker, you know, a country, the state of a nation is known by the number of laws it has. That's how you know how people behave or misbehave. This law is so big because of how mischievous we've become, Mr. Speaker. This law is extensive. Ideally, you don't need so many rules. But now that we have them, let us just have fidelity to the law that we have. Mr. Speaker, I support this bill. Thank you.
Senator Mogeni Okongo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for also giving me an opportunity to make my contribution in support of this amendment of the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment Bill 2021. Mr. Speaker, this law is very important, Mr. Speaker, and before the introduction of this law in 2003 or thereabout, it was not easy, Mr. Speaker, to give opportunities unless you had connections at the highest level of public entities. And I remember, Mr. Speaker, before the introduction of this law, in the legal profession we used to have lawyers who were perceived to be highly connected and doing legal work in the public parastatals was a pre-sub of a few law firms. But with the introduction of this law that opened up business of law firms within the public sector, there are many, many law firms, Mr. Speaker, that have benefited from doing business with public entities like NSSF, NHIF, and etc. Mr. Speaker, with the coming into force of the devolved system of government in 2013, the hope of many professionals was that these opportunities could have extended to the counties and that many professionals would have gotten opportunities to do business with counties so that we create more employment opportunities. The Speaker, if you look at various professionals, may it be auditors, lawyers, surveyors, when they are thriving in their businesses, it opens up opportunities for our youths. And I'm talking about youths who go up to Form 4 level, but they don't attain qualifications to proceed to our universities. They get absorbed to these offices to serve as clerks, to serve as messengers. And this is only possible if we are able to support these professionals to do business with our public entities, county governments included. So, Mr. Speaker, anytime I see a law that is trying to make the playing field fair for all professionals, I can do nothing more than to support, Mr. Speaker. That's why I'm quite happy, Mr. Speaker, that the proposals is actually an attempt to strengthen the provisions that are in this Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act to open more opportunities for the vulnerables in society, including our women, our youth, and persons with disabilities. So our hope, Mr. Speaker, is that as we pass these amendments, those who have been privileged to be chief executives of our public entities will make more opportunities available to these vulnerable groups so that they get opportunities to also do business with government and see the fruits of devolution. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, Kenyans will always find ways of going around things. Even when we have such a very progressive law, you will still find that there is a way Kenyans try to beat the system. I've heard stories from my colleagues in the legal profession, Mr. Speaker, who will respond to an invitation from public entities, including county governments, tender to be included in the panel of law firms that should provide services to our county governments. But you will never be instructed, you'll never get instructions, but you'll find that there is blue-eyed law firms that will always get work from the counties and that will be paid promptly. So I hope as we look into this law and when it goes to the committee, we should make an amendment so that there is a rotational, we put it in the law that you can give work to professionals on a rotational basis. So that if you have, for example, 10 firms of surveyors procured by my good friend Senator Sakaja, who wants to be governor of Nairobi, procured to provide survey services to the county government of Nairobi. You can give services to those to that survey firm in a rotational basis. If today you get work, you give it to firm A, tomorrow you give it to firm B, so that all of them get an equal opportunity to do business with that public entity. But Mr. Speaker, where the situation is appalling and where we need serious intervention is this requirement of each public entity giving 30% of contracts to women, youths, and persons with disabilities. And we get questions from the people we represent because they believe that it is senators who should oversight county governments. I don't know what we will do, whether we need to ask the Attorney General to do an aggressive public education forum within the counties and in all parts of this country, so that our people can understand that the provisions of Article 185 of the Constitution place the first obligation of oversight on our members of county assemblies. And they are the ones who should take their governors to task as to whether they have complied with this law of awarding 30% of contracts to women, youth, and persons with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, I was privileged last week on Thursday. I had a group of several women. I'd organized a training for them in Tombe Girls in Nyamira. And when I mentioned the opportunities that are there for them to do business with the counties, they asked me to ask any of the women present to raise their hands if they have ever gotten an opportunity to do business with the county government of Nyamira. About 8 women had registered companies, and they had applied many times to do business with the county government of Nyamira, but they have never been given an opportunity to do business with the county government of Nyamira. And the same thing happened to another group that I was meeting on Friday at PAG Church within the center of Nyamira. Same thing, they never get these opportunities. And I want to appeal to our governors to be sensitive and even sympathetic to this group of persons who are disadvantaged, who are vulnerable in society. Anytime you empower women, Mr. Speaker, you are actually finishing or eradicating poverty from many households. Where any income women get is, at the end of the day, utilized towards uplifting either the education of their children or feeding families. But they are never given these opportunities. And maybe we need to dig deeper into this law and see how it can be fully implemented and respected by many of our public entities. Mr. Speaker, I don't know why you can't be sensitive to, for example, persons with disabilities. These are people who are not privileged in society in terms of having the ability to do what some of us who have no disabilities can do. So we need to be sensitive to them, we need to uphold them, we need to support them so that they appreciate that we acknowledge that as a sector that is a bit disabled, they need to be affirmed by our governments. So I'm making this point to support the proposed amendments to Section 169, which is in clause 34, that seeks to amend the payment of fees for those that are filing appeals for review. Mr. Speaker, I think 2 years ago, we did amend some sections of this Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act and put a percentage. If you want to appeal, and the fee, the subject contract was for a sum of 2 million, and then you are required to pay a percentage of that contract sum before your review is admitted. That can be damn expensive. It can be damn expensive. So when this amendment bill is proposing in clause 34 that section 169 should be amended to give discretion to the waiving of fees for women, youth, and persons with disability. I'm even proposing, Mr. Speaker, that the word used may should be deleted and be substituted with the word shall, so that we make it mandatory, Mr. Speaker, because discretion can also be abused. So instead of leaving the discretion to the appeals board, we should use a mandatory word and say if it's a review being filed by people with disability, by women, by youths who have no employment, they should not pay any fees. Because at times, Mr. Speaker, people can use financial influence. People have been in business for maybe 10 years or so, can use their financial influence to deny this group of people within society the opportunity to do business. So this fee should not be discretionary, but we should use the word shall so that it becomes mandatory. I don't want to go over what Senator Sakaja said on prompt payment, but that's where we have a serious problem with procurement. Mr. Speaker, I know of friends, Mr. Speaker, who got opportunity to do business with government entities, with county government, Mr. Speaker. They borrowed money from banks, did business, but they have never been paid. And some have had their homes auctioned. I have a very sad case in North Mogirango, Mr. Speaker, where somebody's matrimonial home has been placed up for auction because he did business with the county government of Nyamira. He used that land as security. Money was advanced. He used that money to do business with the county government, but up to now, Mr. Speaker, they have never been paid. And I think that's not the way we should treat our citizens, especially people who are trying to eke a living from this opportunity that has come up of doing business with our county governments. It's not fair, Mr. Speaker. And they're not like some of the international companies, the companies that build our roads, have support from their governments. So they don't use their personal assets as security. We have made all manner of attempts to address this problem, including the law that Senator Sakaja made reference to, prompt payments bill. But still, Mr. Speaker, this is a big problem. Pending bills in our counties have become a huge problem. Huge problem. If the situation does not change, Mr. Speaker, many people will not find it attractive to do business with counties. Because why should you do business with a county government, Mr. Speaker, and you wait for your payment for 6 years? Why should you risk putting your property as security to do business with a government that will never pay? This really is being very unfair to our young entrepreneurs, and I hope some solution can be found to this problem. I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, with the proposal to amend Clause 7. The proposed amendments to Section 41, which is Clause 7 of the bill, that wishes to address frivolous and vexatious appeals to the Appeals Review Board. You know, there are Kenyans who will never accept to lose fairly. If they apply for, to be awarded some tender and they don't get it, it becomes a corruption allegation. They will always say somebody has influenced the process, have been unfairly denied an opportunity, yet at times, even they could not even pass preliminary assessment, even financials alone. So it's good to protect people who genuinely want to do business from these vexatious litigants. There are people who believe in just litigations. Even when they lose fairly, they will still find a way. This is a very progressive proposal, Mr. Speaker, so that the Appeals Review Board, where it, on merit and having considered the appeal, comes to a conclusion that the appeal is frivolous and vexatious, then they can make a decision and strike out that appeal. As Senator Sakaja put it on this afternoon, there are a number of projects that have stalled because of the many appeals that have been filed to the Appeals Review Board. This is progressive, Mr. Speaker, and I fully support. Then there is a clause 14 that proposes to amend Section 54 to introduce the carrying out of market survey. Mr. Speaker, in this country, I hear that even a pen that in the market costs 50 shillings can be sold to government at 500. I like this idea that we should task the head of a procurement entity to carry out market survey, and that market survey should be filed with the accounting officer, so that if you are buying a pen which in the market is costing 50 shillings at 500, you should have some explanation why you have that wide deviation, 50 shillings up to 500. So I think this is again good. We want to protect public money. We don't want to create overnight millionaires. Let us have prices that are fair, that reflect the market prices, and not prices that you clearly point to a collusion between the accounting officer and the service provider for personal enrichment. I can see my time is up, Mr. Speaker, but I'm also happy with what is proposed in, I think, clause 19 of the bill that seeks to amend Section 22 to make the sums that are quoted in the tender documents to be absolute, so that, Mr. Speaker, these games of people putting some figure in the tender documents, but there is a window to change the figure, maybe in collusion with the procuring entity, is done away with, so that there is fair play. So in total, Mr. Speaker, I support the bill that is on the floor. It's progressive, but it needs to be improved. There are some things I'm not very clear about. Like, I don't understand why we should have more than one procurement professional. The Speaker, the accountants have one professional that deals with accountants. Lawyers have one profession that deals with lawyers. I believe it's the same with doctors. So I'm really not understanding what is in clause 2 that seeks to amend the Principal Act by saying that other than the procurement professional body, we can have any other procurement or supply chain professional body recognized in Kenya. Mr. Speaker, I find this to be fairly ambiguous. I think there should be one professional body for procurement that is known and which has standard and the known qualifications, Mr. Speaker. If we say that there should be any other, I don't know what will be the different qualifications from the one we know. So I support Mr. Speaker, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to make my contributions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Musurve was online. I don't know if she's still there. Senator Musurve.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to support this bill. And Honorable Speaker, I must truly say that I see this bill coming in to ensure that there is effectiveness and efficiency in the way in which things are procured in organizations, especially given the fact that the procurement department plays a very vital role in any organization, Honorable Speaker. It is one of the arteries that in any organization, and without the process being smooth, effective, and transparent, then things would collapse in any organization, Honorable Speaker. And Honorable Speaker, I want to say that when we look at this bill, This bill comes out to ensure there's objectivity, impartiality, and organization in the manner in which entities are procured in organization. Given the fact sometimes that in some organizations, the procurement process faces a lot of challenges and things are done haphazardly. But when this bill becomes law, Honorable Speaker, it will ensure that there's order in the manner in which things are procured, Honorable Speaker. And Honorable Speaker, I also want to comment that the issue of the Director General is very, very important in this bill, Honorable Speaker, because the Director General will come in handily to ensure issues of policies are there when it comes to, procuring. Issues of strategies to be employed are also followed, Honorable Speaker. Issues of management are also followed, Honorable Speaker. And even when it comes to budgets that are supposed to be allocated for procurement, then the Director General will come in handily, Honorable Speaker. And even also the issue of the Director General will ensure that there's someone who is accountable with regard to how the procurement process is being managed, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to comment the issue of listing, open list. Open list is very important, one, because it will be in the public domain. And being in the public domain, then it will mean that the public are also involved and they're given a chance to look at the list. They're given a chance to even question whether they are actually involved. And even in the public domain, the issue of persons with disabilities has come out strongly, Honorable Speaker. And I must say, Honorable Speaker, that when it comes to procuring things, entities in the government, persons with disabilities are supposed to be advantaged, but unfortunately they end up being disadvantaged. One, sometimes they lack the money that is needed, and two, sometimes they don't understand the process. So you'll find that in as much as a tender is open and it has been advertised and said, persons with disabilities are encouraged to apply, you'll find that the persons with disabilities also may not know the processes that need to be followed, Honorable Speaker. So, Honorable Speaker, I think also in this bill, there's need to have a window for capacity building, training, just to train women on what is needed for them, the processes they need to follow, the mechanisms of having, their tenders being acceptable, Honorable Speaker. So probably in every organization, there's need for capacity building for the vulnerables, for the women, and also the youth, Honorable Speaker. Because when it comes to procurement process, it's supposed to be a win-win situation, especially for women, persons with disabilities, and the vulnerable. Honorable Speaker, I also want to comment the issue of local contractors being brought on board, and this is an issue also that has been brought in one of our bills in the Senate that was whose proponent is Senator Gideon Moi, who talked about the local content bill. That when it comes to also procurement, the procurement process should consider the locals instead of going for big multinational companies, giving them a chance, and yet we want also our own people to be employed, Honorable Speaker. So I want to say, Honorable Speaker, that this bill is going to be a win-win situation for us as a country, in the sense that the locals will have an opportunity to be economically empowered. The youths and the women and persons with disabilities will also have a chance, Honorable Speaker, because if this bill is going to target local organizations that are registered in Kenya, then it would mean that any multinational company wanting also to do, to tender in Kenya must ensure that the locals, are part of that organization, and maybe 3/4 are also locals, Honorable Speaker. So I want to say, just in briefness, and to save time, that I support this bill, and I feel that this is a bill that we must all support to ensure that procurement processes are going all well in all organizations, because there's no organization that can survive without the procurement department. It is a really, really important department, which should actually be streamlined, and we should be very impartial in the manner in which it operates, Honorable Speaker. I support this bill. Thank you.
Senator Harake Abshiru.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment Bill 2021. And I have become accustomed to, whenever I look at bills emanating from the National Assembly, I look at three things. I look at its prosecution of devolved units. And as much as this bill has a lot of good things, I am a bit worried that we have an opportunity to strengthen devolution through procurement, which we're missing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are lots of amendments that have been made, and lots of them, of course, are very good amendments, from the definitions that have been strengthened and to ensure that inclusivity perhaps has been introduced. When I look at it from my Senate lens, which is basically Article 96 of the Constitution, as the House of Parliament, to ensure that we protect county governments and we protect devolution and we strengthen devolution, and the fact that this is the second or third parliament since independence, then it falls a bit short in the sense that then it's not really amending to align most of the Procurement Act with the challenges that our devolved units are facing. Mr. Speaker, the number one thing we see right now in our devolved units is lack of absorption and delayed implementation of projects. And when you look at why these projects have delayed, in my own county, for instance, the market that was started in 2013 is still under construction. The Isiolo airport that was supposed to have guzzled close to 3 billion is still only 1.4 kilometers long and still needs a lot of work to be done on it. The stadium that is supposed to have given our young people an opportunity to involve themselves in sport is still under construction. And when you drill down to what is causing all these delayed projects, the number one driver of these inefficiencies, the number one driver of this waste, and the number of time, of course, and of resources is the procurement process, Mr. Speaker. So again, the administrative and legal reforms that are much needed to ensure that our devolved units get the capacity they need, the absorption capacity they need, get the implementation capacity they need, actually lies in this bill. But this bill is very much a National Assembly bill and has not looked at some of the key bottlenecks in our devolved units. I don't know if this House would be so kind as to make amendments to ensure that this lens of the devolved units and procurement is strengthened so that this opportunity of this legal reform is not lost by this House and this bill passed as is, therefore missing that opportunity, Mr. Speaker. Issues around absorption, as I've said, lengthy procurement processes, borrowing, even some counties are even borrowing to cover shortfalls, but what is actually creating the waste is the lack of perhaps below optimal capacity, at the same time the legal battles of procurement processes that is happening. At least that has been dealt with a little bit. I'm happy about that because the frivolous, people running to the courts, bidders running to the courts has been touched on, but these are some of the things that we need to look at, not just at the national level, but also at the devolved units, so that then we move in tandem, both with at the national level as well as at the devolved units. Mr. Speaker, again, of course, planning is a key driver of success in these things. Again, I haven't seen much by way of amendments in the planning section of this bill, as much as in the other sections that ensure that so that then we don't take this opportunity for legal reform to become very superficial and miss the points of the key drivers of waste, the key drivers of lack of inclusivity, especially for women and youth in procurement and people with disabilities, of course. Then we need to, as this House, look at these issues and bring the amendments necessary to make this bill much more robust and much more county-facing, Mr. Speaker. Again, the link between the revenue allocation. This House always fights for revenue allocation to counties. The big chunk of revenue ideally goes to some of these projects. And therefore, are we making the link and ensuring that the procurement processes look and have a direct line of sight to the revenue that we fight for and we take to counties? Again, there's issues around the time, the skill, the manpower, the capacity to plan effectively at the county level that need to be seen in this amendment bill, that therefore then for it to really be very substantial as opposed to mostly dwelling on perhaps, definitions and things like that. Another thing that perhaps we haven't taken advantage of, and I'm sorry if I haven't read all of it in detail because I've come into the House a little late, is the use of digital technology and e-procurement, and then amending this bill so that then we start fighting corruption, we start fighting for efficiencies, we start putting in place systems and processes that are internet-based and are e-government driven, so that then we make our laws more topical, more time-bound, and more a la mode, so to speak, more of now than passed by events of the past. Mr. Speaker, there was mention in this bill of tenders reserved for women, youth, and people living with disabilities, but I didn't see much robust amendments made for youth participation, women participation, and PWD participation, other than some mention of tenders reserved, other than tenders reserved for women, youth, and people with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, there's also a few years ago, the Public Procurement and Oversight Act had come up with some certain administrative and legal reforms where they asked the PSS to sit and form committees that would expedite these processes. We don't know if these things have been done, and therefore we need, as this House, to ensure that when bills come to us from the National Assembly, A, the devolved units are dealt with, B, inclusivity and waste is dealt with, and improvements in certain things such as corruption, fighting corruption, project implementation, timelines, and things that are really causing the problems in procurement sector are dealt with. Mr. Speaker, there was also last year a few years ago, I don't think it's last year, maybe it's the year before, with COVID, time passed so fast. I feel like I'm saying last year when it means 3 years ago. There was over 100 billion which was returned to Treasury from ministries which were not able to absorb in that particular financial year. Again, same thing is happening at our counties. So what are we doing? What is this bill doing to ensure that absorption and project implementation and reforms, both administrative and legal, are dealt with in this bill in all sections as seen? Again, I've seen a lot of paragraphs deleting expressions such as things appearing, subject to and things like that, which is okay. But I don't know why I feel like substantial content or substantial pain of our counties and our national government, and substantial bottlenecks in our procurement processes, and substantial opportunities in e-government and in e-procurement and in the internet-based solutions haven't been built into this bill, Mr. Speaker. And for that reason, while I think some work needs to be done, especially by this House, which is mandated under Article 96 to ensure that devolved governments are protected and that devolution actually starts working for the people. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I don't want to belabor this because a lot of people have spoken to the good things in it, which is true. It has a lot of good things in it. But again, I would urge this House to look at bills that come to this House, to look at reforms and amendments that come to this House from the lens of the mandate that was given to us by our Constitution, which A, is to ensure devolution is entrenched and counties and their governments are protected. And one of the better ways and best ways to do so is to ensure that the procurement processes, which is a big driver of inefficiencies, which is a big guzzler of our resources, is looked at and amendments made in that sense. Again, I don't know, maybe because I'm the vice chairperson of the committee for ICT, I also look at things from that angle. And I look at opportunities that could be seized, both for fighting corruption, for saving resources, for saving time, and for even doing things much faster and much better and within budget by using digital technology, which again I feel, if we're amending a bill at this late stage in 2022, perhaps that should feature very prominently in this bill. And with those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I don't wish to belabor it. Having looked at it from the lens of participation and inclusion of youth, women, and people with disabilities, having looked at it from the digital perspective and the e-procurement perspective, and having also looked at it from, again, as a senator, from the angle of devolution and the devolved units, I support, but think we need to do a bit more work to make sure that this amendment is fit for purpose. I support.
Honorable Senators, there are no more requests. I therefore call upon the mover to reply.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to reply. In replying, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize the members who have made their contributions today. Mr. Speaker, and I know that Senator Zani seconded the motion, and we have had Senators Abshiro Halaki, we've had Senator Musurube, we've had Senator Ayako, we've had Senator Mogeni, the Speaker, Senator Sakaja. And Mr. Speaker, those others that I haven't mentioned who may have made their contribution, Mr. Speaker, I want to say thank you to all of them. It is important, Mr. Speaker, that from time to time a law that has been put out is looked at again. And then I'm sure that opportunities are coming again for us to look at it, including the things that Senator Abshiro has mentioned. Mr. Speaker, I think that when a bill comes around, or this time it's an amendment bill, comes around, Speaker, we look at how we can strengthen that. It is, of course, in the devolution that a lot of procurement is taking place these days in the devolved units. And so I do agree that in due course, where there are gaps and further amendments will need to be made, Mr. Speaker, we can do so. The other aspect that Abshiro has brought out is on the use of ICT, and which is, of course, part of these amendments, and the fact that we need to make sure that ICT is not only institutionalized, but is also given emphasis, and the training thereof be given even to the village, the people in the village, to be able to know how to access information. Speaker, I think, Mr. Speaker, that the amendment bill, which has come from the National Assembly, has already been endorsed, and I do agree, Mr. Speaker, that we need to endorse it, and therefore I urge members, senators, to endorse this bill for us to pass it, so that it can go and raise the standard or the level of the services by the procuring entities and institutions, and the services to the people who are served by this bill, the people who are involved in tenders, contracts, and procurements. Mr. Speaker, I think if we look at it, the asset disposal, the one act is public procurement and asset disposal. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, people are beaten by others in getting information because of corruption, because of whom you know, and that has been the it's been the case many times when you try and apply, and then somebody tells you didn't have this, therefore you're disqualified, and yet there are others who know exactly what to get. That's where the disadvantages come, and that's how the selection sometimes fails the test of integrity. And so I do agree, Mr. Speaker, that some of the things that we speak about, we need to have a close look at what else can we do to improve this particular amendment bill. However, Mr. Speaker, for me today, I would ask that we pass it, that we support it, and Mr. Speaker, because we're going to resume our sittings again on Wednesday, I do ask, Mr. Speaker, I beg to request that you defer the putting of the question to a later date, pursuant to Standing Order 61.3. I beg to reply. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Senators, I therefore defer putting of question of order number 24 to a later date. Honorable Senators, order number 10 to 23 stands deferred. Order number 25 to 27 also stands deferred. Honorable Senators, there being no any other business on the order paper, the Senate stands adjourned until Wednesday, 4th May 2022 at 2:30 p.m.
Una nini?
Shida ya pesa.
Kama hii ndio nafikiri itakuwa sababu ya mimi kumsamehe Badi. Well, thinking wrong.
Mumeo unamfahamu, alipi deni.
Usimwambie kwamba nimelipia hilo deni. Na wala usimwambie chochote kunihusu. Mbona usimwambie mume wako? Si ndio mwenzako wa ndoa ama?
Interview ilikuwa ya kulewa ama mlipewa pombe kama kazi?
To burn your legacy. Amy Boy Smith Jr. stepping up to Contra. What the hell? Who is that? There's been a hell of a super kick. It's Pillman. It's Pillman Jr. Heart Foundation.
Weighing in this evening at 190 pounds,